Hey friends, today I will show you why you can get rid of the VLOOKUP function and use the XLOOKUP function instead. In this tutorial I will show you the following things. Firstly, the syntax of VLOOKUP and XLOOKUP. Secondly, the advantages of XLOOKUP and why it is better than VLOOKUP. And lastly, I will show you some tricks that are pretty good and will bring your skills to the next level. We have a table here that gives us information about all our employees, and if we now want to look for a specific person, for example Emmy Wade, we could go into the list manually, search for Emmy's name, and then if we found her, then we could go to the right to get any information that we need. And that's actually what our lookup functions do. So let me show you quickly how the VLOOKUP function works and then go over to the XLOOKUP function. VLOOKUP can have up to 4 arguments, and the first argument it's asking for is the lookup value. And that's the value that we are looking for. So in our case, that's Emmy Wade, which is in cell G2. After that, we have to define a table array, and that's a range where all our information that we want to work with is located. So in our case, that would be A2 to E14. And VLOOKUP is always using the first column of that range to search for our lookup value. And if the lookup value is found in any row, then it takes the complete range of that row and takes a look at all the values. And for that we can use the third argument, which defines the precision of the value we want to get back. So we got 5 columns here. And if we want to get back, for example, the department, we could just type in number 2. And then it would give back the value of the second column. Now we want to take a look at the fourth argument, which is the range lookup. And this one is optional, but in our case we need to define it. So we have 2 options here. We can either select the exact match, which is 0 or false, or we can go for an approximate match, which is the default option here. So in our case we want to search for the name, right? And therefore we want to search an exact match. And the algorithm of the VLOOKUP function goes from top to bottom along all those values and compares them with our lookup value. And as soon as it finds an exact match, the row for giving back the information is defined. So if we would have 2 Emmy Wades here in the list, then it would always give back the row of the first one. If we don't define this fourth argument, or define it as 1 or true, then we will have the approximate match. And what it does here is also going from top to bottom, and as soon a value is found that is greater than our lookup value, then it will go just 1 step back. As you can see, it works not only with numbers but also with strings. So it compares there the letters of the lookup value with the comparison value. This method makes only sense though if our range where we are going to look up our lookup value is in an ascending order. So if that's the case, it will just find a value that's the closest to our lookup value. Let's now try the same with the XLOOKUP function. So we are going to search for the name and want to give back the department. XLOOKUP has 6 arguments and 3 of them are necessary and the other 3 are optional. And we want to find the department for Emmy Wade now by using the least amount of arguments. Firstly, we want to define our lookup value. Secondly, we want to define the range where we want to look at. And lastly, we define the range with the return value. The algorithm of the XLOOKUP function now takes the lookup value and goes into the lookup array. And it searches dependent on the match mode that you defined, from top to bottom or from bottom to top until it finds the value that you have defined. Afterwards, it determines the position of the located value, and then it goes into that return array and get to the same position there. And that's the value that will be given back as a result. It's important to note that the lookup array and the return array must have the same length. If that's not the case, you will get back an error. Since we now know how VLOOKUP and XLOOKUP work, we can start Excel and compare them directly. Now let's try to define the department of all the employees here by using both functions. And let's start with the VLOOKUP. We type in VLOOKUP, and the first thing we have to define is the lookup value, which is Peter Dixon here. Then we have to define the table array. So let's define the whole white space so that we got some more space here if we add some new things. And then we press F4 to fix it. We have to define the index number, which is here in our case the department, so number 2. And then we have to define the range lookup, which is exact match, so we can type in false or 0. Let's do that and close it. So Peter Dixon is controlling. Let's do it with XLOOKUP. And there we have to define firstly as well the lookup value, Peter Dixon, then the array where we want to search the value. So let's define column F here, fix it with F4, and then we go to the return array, which is in G, fix it also F4, and we just close the brackets and press enter. Both functions gave back the same result, which is good, but XLOOKUP syntax is maybe a little bit more intuitive and quicker to implement because the match mode or default match mode is exact match. So we could say it's 1.0 for XLOOKUP here. Let's now copy and paste those functions down to the other cells. And as you can see, we get back some NA errors here. And they mean that James Smith and Bob Miller couldn't be found in our table here. And now we want to get rid of those NAs, and instead we want to get back a string, which is called not defined. And to do that, we can go to our VLOOKUP function and type in another function in front of it, which is called the ifError function. And after the value, we have to type in the value if it's error, and that's not defined as a string. So we use these quotation marks, we close the bracket, and now I copy and paste it down. And as you can see, we got this not defined here. So for XLOOKUP, instead of typing in this ifError function, we can easily go into the formula, and the fourth argument is pretty cool. It's called ifNotFound, and there we can just type in not defined. Boom. If we copy and paste it down, we solve the problem much quicker. So we can say here it's 2.0 for XLOOKUP. Let's quickly visualize those not defined values. So let's select this range, go to home and conditional formatting, then to new rule, format only cells that contain equals to, and then we type in not defined. And if that's the case, we want to give back a red color, fill color, and we adjust it a little bit so that it's a little bit brighter, and we go to OK, and now we see the not defined values. There's an important thing that you notice if you take a look at the VLOOKUP and the XLOOKUP function, and that's the value that defines what value has to be given back. And if you take a look at the VLOOKUP, we have this index number here, which is a fixed number. And in the XLOOKUP function, we have not a fixed number, but we have this cell reference as a range, right? And now take a look what happens if, let's say, we have this table here and we want to add another information about those people here, and we want to insert a column before column G. So let me do that. And as you can see, if we do that, this VLOOKUP function isn't working anymore. So if I copy and paste it down to just recalculate this formula, you see that VLOOKUP isn't working, so we get back a 0, and XLOOKUP still keeps the same. If we take a look to the formula, you see this reference here is moving with the shift here, but the VLOOKUP function keeps the fixed number the same, so number 2. So now it gives back the values inside this column. So as you can see, that could be a problem probably, and therefore it's 3.0 for XLOOKUP. Sometimes you don't receive your data like this, where your heading is listed horizontally and your information or lookup values are listed vertically. Instead, you get a transposed table like this here, where the heading is vertical and the information is horizontal. And the VLOOKUP here isn't working, so instead we must use the HLOOKUP. But if you use the XLOOKUP function, the good thing about that is that it also works for transposed tables. So let me show you this right now. Type in the XLOOKUP function, just define the lookup value, define the range where we want to search, and define the range where or that we want to give back, the return array here. Let's press enter. And as you can see, the XLOOKUP function works pretty fine here. So it seems to be 4.0. Let's go back to the other sheet, remove this column here to make both functions work again. And as we can see, we have a year of entry here. And this whole table is sorted by that column. So that means the most recent data is actually at the bottom. So for example, if Peter Dixon joined the controlling department in 2011, but then he switched in 2021, let's say to the sales team, then we actually want to give back this information here, right? So with VLOOKUP, unfortunately, we can't do that, but XLOOKUP got a cool function. And if we take a look inside this formula and we go after the if not found argument, we will find the match mode first, and we can just leave it blank or type in false or 0 for the exact match, but it's not important here. And then we go for the search mode. And the search mode is a cool feature where you can use either first to last or last to first. And that's the number -1. So -1 means search last to first, which actually means search from bottom to top instead of from top to bottom. Let's press enter. And now you can see that Peter Dixon now works in the sales team. If I switch it back to number 1, then it's controlling because we got Peter Dixon here for controlling. And let me give it back to -1. Then we have here Peter Dixon in the sales team. So it's a pretty cool feature, and we got a 5.0 for XLOOKUP. Sometimes your key values where you want to look up your data aren't located in the first column. Instead, it's located somewhere in the middle of the data table or even at the end. If I now shift this column here to the right, let's say the column J, then we see VLOOKUP isn't working anymore. It keeps the range the same, and it's now looking up the value in department, which isn't right in our case. XLOOKUP instead adjusted the ranges according to our changes. So the lookup array is still name and the return array is still our department. So if you want to place your key values anywhere in the data table, you should take XLOOKUP. It even works if I take the key values, shift them further to the right and even a little bit down. You see, it still works because of the syntax. And therefore we got a 6.0. Since we found many reasons why XLOOKUP should be preferred over VLOOKUP, I think it's time to go over some good tips that can help you to really improve your lookup skills. Let's dive into it. You have probably noticed that whenever I made a change to our XLOOKUP function, that I copy and pasted it along all those cells. And the problem with that is not only that it takes a little bit longer, but more importantly, some mistakes can happen. For example, if I copy the cell here and paste it into the other cells, and I forgot 2 cells here, then they're not refreshed, right? Another problem might be if I didn't fix my ranges, for example, the lookup array and the return array, and I paste it down, then you see that the values are not right anymore. And that's because the ranges have shifted. So to get rid of that problem, you can use an array formula. And the good thing about Microsoft 365 is that you don't need any trick here. It's so simple to use. So let's do it from scratch. And we type in the XLOOKUP formula. And the only thing you have to do is, instead of defining this only one cell here, you can define the complete range for the lookup value. And if I now define the lookup array, which is this range here, and the return array, and let's also define if not found, we define not defined, and the match mode was exact match, which is 0 or false, and the search mode is -1 because we want to search from a bottom to top, right? Then let me close the bracket, and what you will see now is, boom, that this function expands all the values until the last row. If we now click on any value here, we'll see this little frame around the array, and we'll also see that our function is a little bit grayed out. That means this value is part of this array formula. And if you click into the first cell, then we see it's black again. And that means this function here, or this cell, is the source of this complete array. So if you want to make a change, we just do it by clicking inside the function. And now, for example, if we don't want to give back the department, we could just change this range into, let's say, the year of entry, and press enter. And you see immediately we have the complete range adjusted here. So much more simple and a good way to just be more efficient. If you want to change the information that's being returned here, we always have to click inside the formula and change the return array. This manual process can take a lot of time and is pretty annoying, so we want to make it dynamic and automated. To do that, we want to define a drop-down menu here where we can choose one of those headings. And if we change the value, we want to make this XLOOKUP function adjusted in a way so that we get back the associated information. To do that, we want to firstly define our drop-down menu. So we click on the cell, then we go for data, we go to data validation, select the list, select a source, which is our heading, press enter and go for OK. And now we have a drop-down menu here. And to make that a little bit more visible, we want to change the color to, let's say, dark blue. And so we can immediately see that there's a drop-down menu. Now I can click on it and change any value that I want. Since this value is not included in our XLOOKUP function, the values always keep the same now. So what we have to do is include this drop-down value inside our XLOOKUP function. We know that our return array can be any of those ranges here. And what we want to create is a function or formula where we take this drop-down value, search in that heading for the position, and if you find it, for example here the year of entry, then we want to give back this array, and this array should be included then inside our XLOOKUP function. And to do that, we just want to use XLOOKUP as well. I will now try to create this dynamic return array right here in column K. So let me use the XLOOKUP function, and we want to take the drop-down value and search it inside our heading. And now we want to define for the return array this complete range here. So that means if it finds one of those values, we will give back not just a single value, but a complete range. So let me try that. Close the bracket, press enter, and you see it seems to work. If I change the drop-down menu, let's say to department, it also works for gender as well. So that seems to be pretty nice. Now we take this formula and we want to insert it inside our main function. And since we said we want to make the return array dynamic, therefore we have to put that formula inside the range here. So let me copy that, go inside the main formula and select the return array. And now I just copy and paste it in and press enter. And now you see the gender is given back, which is pretty nice. Let me change it to name so we see directly if it's right or wrong. And let me go for department, and you see it is adjusted right now. Let me remove this help column here, and now we see that we have a dynamic formula. Excel has a cool feature that it's called named ranges, and it helps you to define a name for any range that you want. So for example, I can define a name for this heading here, and I can define a name for the key values here, so where we want to look up our lookup value, and then I can define a name for our complete range. And that will help you especially for our XLOOKUP function. Let's do that. Let's select the heading first, go to formulas and go for define the name. we will call it NR for named range so that we know that we defined it. Then underline, and we will call the table here employee, and this specific range we will call it heading. Press OK. Now we'll go for the key values, so the name, go to formulas, define name, and we'll also call it NR employee, and this time we call it names, so the names of the people. And now we define the complete range here of the data, formulas, define name, and we'll call that NR employee, and let's say data. Okay. And now if you go to formulas and click on name manager, you will see those named ranges right here. And now we can access them by typing in the name into our formulas. Let's do that. Let me once again remove this XLOOKUP function here. And let's say we define the named ranges first, then we create this dropdown menu, and now we want to build this XLOOKUP function from scratch. So the lookup value is this range here, and we want to look it up inside this column, and we define a name for that, which we called NR employee names right here. So we can just double click it, and you see now this range is selected. Then we want to define our return array, and because we want to have it dynamic, we have to create another XLOOKUP here. We want to look up the value of the dropdown menu, and we want to look it up inside our heading. And for that, we also define the name. Let me type in heading, and now we see that name here. Let's click on it, and the return array is our complete range. So we also defined that and called it something like data. Double click, and now you see it's all have been selected. Let's close that. The return array is defined, and now we can go for if not found. We wanted to give back not defined. And then we have the match mode, which is an exact match, so we can keep that empty or define a 0. And then we wanted to search from bottom to top, so we will define the -1. Let's close that, press enter, and you see it works pretty well. And if you now go inside the formula, you see these names here, and you defined them properly, everyone will immediately know what you're doing here. So sometimes the letters and the numbers of the ranges might be a little bit confusing, and those named ranges can help you to make your formulas better understandable. The XLOOKUP function is also very helpful if you work with price tables or with any scales. And for example, if we buy a t-shirt here and we buy 10 or more pieces, we'll get a price of $12. If we buy 100 pieces or more, we get the price of $8. And here we want to be able to choose a product, type in a quantity, and our XLOOKUP function should us give back the proper price. So let me type it in here, XLOOKUP, and we want to look up for the product inside this range here, and we want to give back any of those arrays, but we want to make it dynamic. Therefore, we will insert another XLOOKUP function, and there we want to look up the quantity inside our quantity list here, and we want to give back this complete range here. And now we can define the if not found value. Let's just type in not found or something like that, and the match mode here should be for that quantity. As you see, we don't have an exact match here because we can also have like a quantity of 15 or 16, and therefore we have to use -1 or 1. And in our case here, since we get the price from 10 to 99 pieces of the number 10 here, therefore we have to choose the exact match or the next small item. So for example, if we find or if we search for number 12 here, it will go between 10 and 100. And if we choose -1, it will take the next small item, which is 10. So let's type in -1 here, and let's close it. Then we go further with the if not found value for the general XLOOKUP function, and we call also not found. And the match mode should there be an exact match. We could leave that empty, but let me define it. And let me close that, press enter. And now you see we get back number 8, which should be fine for 100 pieces. Let's try 99. Then we should get back the number 12. Nice. Let's go for another product. Let's say the bags. 99 pieces is in that range here. And for the bags, 36 is also right. Let's change it to 105. And we get 28 back, which is also fine. So as you can see, it works well with those scales, and you can just change the exact match to an, let's say, not exact match like -1 or 1, and then it works very well. That's it for today's video. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, just leave them in the comments. Thanks and bye.